So what we do is we make it easy to start and successfully run a home-based childcare and preschool, and then we make it really rewarding for families to find and engage with those programs.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in this week. This week we learned all about a market that very likely befuddles many of you. It certainly does me, and that's childcare. We speak with Erica Mackey, the founder and CEO of MyVillage, along with Elke Govertsen, the creator of Mamalode, who just teamed up with MyVillage as their chief community officer. You know, disruption is an overused, overhyped buzzword at this point, but the childcare market is one that seems very frustrating to everyone involved. Erica and her team at MyVillage are rethinking that and trying to change it, and their model is quite compelling. In this conversation, we investigate that model, talk about how in just 1 year, MyVillage has helped launch over 27 women-owned small businesses, and finally, as a seasoned vet in entrepreneurship, Erica offers some great wisdom for anyone aspiring to launch a new venture. So without further ado, I bring you Erica Mackey and Elke Govertsen. Okay, so we're here today with Erica Mackey, Elke Govertsen, part of the MyVillage team. Erica, you're the co-founder and CEO. Elke just joined the team as Chief Community Officer. That is such an awesome title, not only in general, but for you specifically. I want to dig into that. But Erica, welcome to Missoula. You're kind of making a tour through this side of the state.
Thank you.
Bozeman's headquarters for you, right?
It is, yep. We have an office in Bozeman and a lab school actually in our office.
A lab school. I don't even know what that is.
We have one of our MyVillage locations inside of our office. So our children go there, so they're in our office, and we're part of the experiment to learn experimental parents. And we also have other members of our community that have their kids in care in our office. Yeah,
so MyVillage is setting out to sort of fix childcare, early childhood education, etc. So give us the pitch. I mean, you're probably well practiced because you just landed one of the largest seed round in Montana history. What is it, just under 6 million?
That's right, yeah.
So yeah, tell us about what is MyVillage? What are you trying to sort of do and disrupt and change?
Sure, yeah. So there's about 15 million children in the United States under the age of 5 that are in paid care, and over half of their parents are not happy with their current situation. So quality is super variable all over the place, and it actually costs more to send your child to childcare as a 4-year-old than it does to public university tuition in more than 50% of the states across the U.S. So the equation doesn't make sense. What we found is it's basically quality, affordability, and availability unless you get on a wait list before you started thinking about conceiving.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, we lived in Seattle when we had our kids, and like people sort of like we were ostracized because we hadn't thought about childcare before we thought about having a child. It was just so odd culturally.
When I landed in Montana and started calling providers trying to figure out, I had a 1-year-old at the time, calling people trying to figure out, can I get on wait lists? I heard about amazing family home provider people who run childcare businesses out of their homes. I heard back more than once, I will never have an opening because my parents plan their pregnancies around my availability.
It sounds perverse, but it's sort of just a symptom of a big problem, a problem you and your team are trying to solve.
Exactly. I mean, it makes you as a parent feel like you're failing before you even have a chance to start, which is just heartbreaking. So, I'm an entrepreneur of history too. So serial entrepreneur. I have another business called Zola Electric in Africa. So I actually moved to Montana from East Africa. I was there for 12 years. Yeah. And that business was in a totally different sector, but it's basically kind of solar city, if you will, for low-income African households. So my experience there was building a business from PowerPoint presentation to what ended up being, we're over 1,000 person workforce, full-time, 2,500 person sales force across 5 countries, install about 10,000 houses a month, raised over $200 million to scale that business. Wow. Ended up as a parent on the road trying to be a working mom, which is where the pain became very real for me. And then as I started to unearth, really, is this just my problem? Is this other people's problem? Brought me back to the States, because it turned out just because I hadn't been hearing about the challenge didn't mean it wasn't real. It's because I wasn't asking the question and I wasn't a parent yet. And so once I unearthed these pain points, I then went to the other side of the system trying to say, okay, well, if it's not working for parents, it must be working for somebody who in the system is winning.
Yeah. Who in the system is winning?
Yeah, it turns out nobody.
It sounds like that. I mean, you sort of present this problem of, shortage of supply.
Yeah.
And then providers that are underpaid, underappreciated.
Yep.
Parents that are unsatisfied, that feel like they can't afford it. I mean, this seems like it's one of those mountains beyond mountains problems.
Yeah, and some of the reason that that's evolved is because there hasn't been a large enough scale view of how to kind of tackle fixing the system from a services perspective. So when I looked at the educator side and the provider side, talked to hundreds of childcare center director employees, and then learn pretty quickly about family home, what's licensed. There's a whole regulatory system that tackles that, and also unofficial kind of friends, families, and neighbors that are also participating in the childcare system, nannies and things. And so we talked to everybody and found out pretty quickly how magical family home experience that experience could be. But it's not often executed very well, and it's not supported by kind of a professional support system to help those businesses really become viable businesses. So really well-intentioned people get into childcare because they're super passionate about kids, but often end up having to close their doors because they find out pretty quickly that they have to be front of the house, back of the house, marketer, chef.
Right. Do the whole thing.
Oh, by the way, provide phenomenal care for 8 to 10 hours a day on top of that. And by the time they realize they've actually been subsidizing care for all their neighbors, their kids are now in kindergarten, and it's not worth it to keep the business going.
Sure. So I'd love to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of how you kind of find, kind of create your value proposition. Before we do that, though, Elke, last we spoke, you were sort of transitioning out of Momaload, this wonderful sort of multimedia platform you created here that it's been such a powerful community builder. Taking some time off for yourself, yet something about My Village drew you back in.
Yeah, a lot of that is named Erica Mackey.
Okay. We already could see, Erica, you're very compelling.
She's a very compelling person, hard to say no to.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to do some consulting with My Village, even concurrently with Momaload. And it was great. I got to learn a lot. I got to see how their team work. I got to see a form of leadership that I don't normally get exposed to, as well, as far as goal setting and keeping a team moving quickly and aligned.
Okay.
So I was really compelled at first by just the sort of way of working. I had originally really thought I was going to step back from the parenting space, because after doing Momaload, I was like, I'm good for a little while on that. But really, when I defined what it was I wanted to work with people I adored. Because for a decade, I've been meeting people and been like, oh, it'd be great to do something together.
Right.
You get that camaraderie. And then I wanted to take better care of myself than I had as running my own startup. And I wanted to change the world. And I was not sure if I could pull off all three of those things at once.
That's a tough Venn diagram right there.
It is a tough Venn diagram, but I think if you really insist on it, it's pretty amazing how insistence pushes your circles into overlap.
Like quality, affordability.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Basically, it's very similar.
Make it happen.
You guys are optimizing for a lot of variables here.
And when I thought about the causes that I personally care about, that I do think are things I'd like to see change in the world, be that I'm raising sons, so I think a lot about masculinity.
Yep.
I'm raising high schoolers, so I think a lot about school shootings. I mean, there's a lot of issues that I kind of wanted to put myself behind. We're in Montana with the highest suicide rates in the country, and there's causes that I had sort of thrown myself at before. But really, when you go all the way back to that 0 to 5 space, you're actually touching all of those.
Absolutely.
In the long range.
Yeah.
So it was like, if I wanted to get to work with the best people in the world, change the world in the most dramatic and effective way, and then the taking care of myself is a little more on me. But Erica's really good at helping me with that too. this was the right space for me.
Absolutely. And so you've plugged in as Chief Community Officer, and you just got to tell me what that even means.
I know, it's awesome. Like the best, right?
Yeah.
I know everyone's...
I mean, we did have a few weeks back, we had Emily Grassley on, and she's a graduate of our program, but she is now Chief Curiosity Officer at a museum in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
That's a pretty cool title.
That's
but
a really
Chief Community
good
Officer is pretty cool, too.
CCOs of all different...
all the CCOs.
Yeah,
those are always the best. It's either
yeah.
Chief Creative Officer, which is also a fun title. So all you listeners out there, go for the CCO roles, whatever they may be.
Yeah.
For me, it was a great fit because I was kind of hitting both building our internal community, whether that's our team and the culture there, or the educators and their experience, or the families in the program. Those were all in my wheelhouse. It also, as a title, allows me to open up my community and my network to this new job and be able to take a decade of Montana business experience and put it into a newer company in Montana as well.
One of the things from the company side of why it made sense at this stage to really invest at this level in our community function is because one of the things that we learned when we went and talked to all of the different educators from all different backgrounds, what was pretty, while certainly different trends popped out, what was pretty glaring was that people often shut the doors of their business because they felt isolated. And so you're spending all day in your four walls with 0 to 5-year-olds, and you don't have a broader professional community to connect to have your back, to be in your corner, to connect you with resources, just to say, we've got you. And so a lot of what we're trying to do, so yes, all the workflow all of the business toolkit stuff, but at the end of the day, we are connecting a very fragmented market and individual business owners with a broader support network and a community that they often never experienced before.
Thinking about that, and just in the name of the business, My Village, is so perfect. I think any parent can sort of recognize that moment when you're feeling all alone. Like I think of a moment on an airplane with, my kid's crying and I'm just like so stressed out trying to do whatever it takes to soothe this young creature that I have no idea how to relate with. And then some just whether it's a flight attendant or a fellow passenger, whoever, just lends a hand. And we throw this phrase, it takes a village, around all the time.
Yeah.
Yet we rarely generalize it to kind of the system that we put in place to help us as parents.
Absolutely.
There has to be sort of an inspiration behind some of the philosophy. And then I noticed, your time in Africa probably informed how childcare is conceptualized as well, I would assume.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, where in a village, there's not a ton of monetary resource, right? But everybody, there's, even in remote villages, it's not like the sense of orphans or communities absorb anybody in need, and there's always a safety net. And so for, from that level all the way up to just extended relatives always surfacing and figuring it out. Nobody's ever left hanging. Mm-hmm. And so that was really an inspiration and I do think that there's a future where this business model, as we get kind of those pillars, the quality piece as well as the accessibility piece figured out, that we can go and the different weighted challenges, we can solve them in different cultures as well. So we can help bring scalable quality to communities and other places that have the availability.
And different kinds of communities too, not just like location communities. There's lots of sub-cohorts of people who identify by the same curriculum or the same location or the same part of the process. And that's a really, I think, special thing about My Village is having such a focus on expanding definitions of community.
Sure.
And how to really make that just as value added as product itself.
So you're thinking of like knowledge sharing across, geography doesn't necessarily define community. Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
Yeah, there's a ton of expertise in our educators as well.
Right.
We do have mentors. We also have formal guides. We have lots of different formal layers, but just within any niche community, sometimes you just step back and let them share with each other. And so really building around that. There's curriculum choices. There's even just maybe their own ages. There's lots of different ways to reshuffle the deck so that people know they're not alone.
Yeah.
One of the learnings actually from a business model perspective that we took to be able to lean in and support this kind of peer learning infrastructure, learning community, was actually from a pretty unexpected source in Montana, was Great Harvest Bread.
Oh, interesting.
And so we didn't expect when we started this business to end up being a franchise. I don't even know if you know that we are a franchise.
Right.
But we ended up going down that path early last year because as we got started, we realized we would not be satisfied with creating businesses that we weren't thrilled to put our own kids in. And so if we were going to maintain and commit ourselves to a level of quality, they all didn't need to look the same or follow the same philosophy, but a place that we knew had really great heart-led educators and, quality infrastructure in their program, that we, had to provide a certain level of support, especially since we are supporting a lot of brand new educators.
Right.
And B, a certain standard hurdle that they would need to hurdle over to make sure that we could then go and sell to parents a quality experience that we could stand behind. Turns out you actually are a franchise if you co-brand, if you take payment and you provide, and that's the gray area, some level of support on the final experience and user experience. So we embraced that pretty early on and we also knew it's in a home, so we can't make cookie cutter experiences, nor did we want to for each of these businesses. And you're ending up franchising people's living rooms, kitchens, and backyards in this model, which is also impossible to standardize to a very minute degree. And so we looked for models that had actually already sort of tried to explode the franchise structure and make it work for them. And Great Harvest Bread was a really great example. So they have trademarked Freedom Franchise is what they call it, and it's basically you have to give away free bread, play loud music, have a great harvest sign, and mill your wheat fresh every morning.
Okay.
And everything else is sort of on the table.
So
right at the control of the franchisee.
Including recipes. And there's
Store
lots of
layout.
shared services of like, hey, this marketing worked well, this recipe worked well, but they're not required.
So the learning community around, and they're quite data driven, so the learning community around their franchisees, these franchisees are great, the top 10% performers in customer service, in recipes, and then they incentivize them to share their experience and their best practices. And so that's really the concept that we felt would really resonate with our educators, where everyone was on a standardized footing for what quality could look like.
Yeah.
But that we could then help them really share what's working for them so others could learn and we could iterate a lot more quickly.
For sure. I want to sort of understand the business model.
Yep.
Just because it does seem like one of those unsolvable problems where you've got customers that think they're overpaying for service, and then you've got providers that are underpaid and undervalued.
Yep.
As you said before, nobody in the system's winning. Maybe the regulators were winning. I don't know. That's maybe a hypothesis. I don't know what even that looks
people
like.
People employed by the government doing but that's a stretch.
Sure. So you've got this notion of you're going to disrupt this market that's not working. Yet how do you do it in such a way that solves these problems, that provides an exciting wage for an educator, that solves some of the affordability problems for parents, and also provides a return for your investors? I mean, you've got a large, this record-setting seed round. I mean, the expectations are high for this thing to scale. Yeah.
So the key that unlocks the answer to what we discovered was really once we experienced what quality family home, so people who run home-based childcare and preschool businesses, what that can look like and feel like, and ultimately drive amazing outcomes for the kids and families in care. When we saw that was possible, that was what got us really excited, because already it's lower overhead. You're sharing the overhead with your own family space. There's a lot of tax benefits to running a business in your home and running a home-based childcare.
So were there some like prototypes that you came across, an in-home childcare or educator facility where they're like, wow, this family has, or this man, woman, whoever has it figured out?
Yep. Well, there was actually a few of them, and they weren't all the same. Was
Right.
what was great. But what they did have in common was a few things. One, they had really phenomenal relationships with the families that are in care.
Okay.
So it was a very like if you can think of it that way, co-parenting experience. They're spending more time during the week with the educator than they are at home with awake at least at home with the families.
Yeah, unfortunately or fortunately. I don't
it
want
is
to
what
judge
it is.
that. Right.
Right. And so having that really fluid conversation and connection was one of the things. 2 was the continuity of care. So kids who are in care from, infant toddler age range all the way through to 5 years old as they move on to preschool, having 1 or 2 educators that they're working with that entire time.
Continuity.
Really important. Also mixed ages. So this can only happen in family home where and because centers are just larger numbers, you have to start to control by age range. Otherwise, it's safety-wise is a challenge. And
and all there's sorts of regulations around that too, I would assume.
So when family home can be licensed, and this is, in-home childcare can be licensed for 6 kids or 12 kids. And you have an employee if you have 12, so the ratios are still 6 to 1. But they're mixed ages, 0 to 5. And one of the beautiful things about that is also how our brains are wired at that early age to be able to role model and build empathy for younger kids, and then have that role model as a younger kid to watch and learn. And that's how we developed as social humans. And so having that ability is also really important. Pairing that with a well-structured day, an evidence-based child-led curriculum, thought-out environment, the outcomes were phenomenal. And we were starting to see that told by kindergarten teachers saying, hey, kids coming into my program from these
prepared,
schools,
better outcomes.
And really well, the social emotional skills were, the foundation was really solid, their executive functions. So from that, we said, okay, it's not only possible, but it's ideal if we can figure out how to make the home-based model work.
A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications, 2 cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
I'm Maureen Dowd of the New York Times, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Then when we stepped back and looked at it from a systems level, why a lot of them were closing their doors was because they couldn't make the business run. And because each of them was starting for the very first time, every time, alone. And so there was a ton of inefficiency in the system sourcing by themselves. There was no economies of scale from what they were doing. So I stepped back and looked at it and said, okay, well, we can certainly solve the business running side of it. Like that's the stuff that we know how to do really well. And when we consolidate this super fragmented market, there's a lot of financial efficiencies to be gained, which we can then pass on to both the educators and the parents. And so our first kind of thesis about this was can we make a percentage on basically the fees that is course corrected by how much we save them in that experience of shared services and consolidation. And turns out we can. So our business model, even taking a step back, so what we do is we make it easy to start and successfully run a home-based childcare and preschool. And then we make it really rewarding for families to find and engage with those programs.
Okay.
And we do that through community. We do that through technology. We do that through mentorship, a ton of different ways that we kind of go at delivering on that. But that's the fundamental premise. And what we have found is that ultimately, for the 10%, so we take 10%. We don't charge, even though we're a franchise, we charge no franchise fee because we're just using that structure to be able to help with quality. It's not really the business model behind a franchise isn't really that attractive to us or to the problem we're trying to solve.
Right.
So 10%, but we need to earn them back way more than the 10%. And what we've been finding for existing businesses that have already been running, that have come into our platform and started with all this services, is that they're actually earning 30 to 50% more with us than without us. So even with the fee that we charge. So
is that just freeing up so much capacity in the home for the educator, perhaps?
Well, it's also, even with wait lists, when you have all that on your plate to do every day,
It's a lot.
It's hard to
Yeah.
fill the spots, those gaps. That becomes kind of the Tetris of scheduling, where you have one family that does, 2 days a week at half day and another that does. And so
Yeah.
you don't have the meta view of demand to plug all those gaps. So we can, without increasing rates for parents, we can help fill out and optimize their occupancy.
Oh, so the parents are coming through your system.
Yep.
Okay, that's huge.
Yep. So, and eventually when we have, hundreds in Montana, thousands of locations across the state, parents will be able to come and get intentionally. Right now we do it more manually, where they're connected when we know what they're looking for. But think about Match.com for finding the perfect educator for your child. I mean, it would be think about the pain that we currently experience, and then having somebody, you get the luxury of being able to match your parenting ethos with the person that you can afford as well. So that's our dream. And our dream is also to move into a neighborhood and realize there's a MyVillage down the block and sigh with relief, because it's a problem solve for you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this in terms of, one of the themes we've explored in a variety of episodes on this podcast is, different gender equity oriented issues. And this is a topic, at least from my reading of Mama Load, Elke, is kind of in your wheelhouse. This sort of discrepancy in the mental load that traditionally the mom has had to bear in a household. Those things like scheduling all the kids' things, their appointments, figuring out childcare, all these things typically disproportionately fall on the woman in the family. How has your kind of exploration of that issue, through Mama Load and other parts of your life, kind of informed your approach to this particular opportunity?
Well, one of the greatest things about MyVillage choosing the franchise model is every time they open one, they create a new business owner, almost always a woman.
Yeah.
Thus far, calling all men.
Sure.
Challenging you.
Yeah,
we would love to have a few guy-run programs, but right now it is 27 new women business owners to this date.
27 already. How long have you been doing this?
Since last year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the things about this industry being historically fragmented is that doesn't feel like a professional network.
Right.
So also by elevating this as a profession, this as an aspirational profession, and to be part of something larger and to be part of something that may even be a movement. So I think that's a really great piece of the gender conversation around MyVillage. As far as the mom piece, this also gets a lot of moms back in the workforce, which I think is super important as well.
Yeah, and you think about where the dollars go and the returns on those dollars. I mean, I think about you're probably familiar with James Heckman's work and the Heckman curve. We make this big hooty-doo about professors and universities and all this stuff, and all these gatekeeping functions that somebody like me had to go through to get to this job. Yet the return on paying me to educate your kids much lower than the return on paying somebody to educate 0 to 5-year-old children. Yep. It's kind of perverse where we put value in our society. I'm not sort of marketing against myself as in universities.
This is an interesting case you're making, Justin.
But it is. I mean, that's part of this. One, establishing businesses for these people kind of elevates the professionalism associated with that role. The language you're using, calling these people educators,
They
powerful.
are educators.
And
Absolutely.
entrepreneurs.
Educators and entrepreneurs. That's empowering. That elevates. And it seems like a model like this is doing a lot of social good as well. It has to be a huge motivator.
It is the motivator.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm motivated to solve my own pain as well, which is what got me interested in the first place. But what actually motivated me to transition from focusing on what I was doing in Africa, which I was very motivated by some of the poorest people paying the most for the dirtiest energy options, was an equation that just didn't sit, and I wanted to course correct. This was, as soon as I went out to find that who's actually getting affordability, availability, quality, when you look at the income restrictions as people, have less and less resource in their household, the compromises that families have to make in those environments are heartbreaking. And so for us, it wasn't just about the creating a great business opportunity.
Right.
We aren't going to do that at the expense of jacking up rates on parents either. And that is why the family home structure, it's already the lowest cost model because you cut out a lot of the overhead requirements of a center-based model. And it allows us to create amazing quality at an affordable rate for families across the spectrum. And then we also have prioritized on the impact side, prioritized making it accessible for families that also qualify for subsidy support.
Okay. So you provide some of that infrastructural support as well.
Yeah, because what ends up happening is even though especially in the family home structure, that even though educators can, in essence, plug in with the subsidy offering, it's so much overhead and admin to report on it that if you have a wait list, which most of them, if not all of them, you hear people talk, I've got 100 kids on my, I've got a wait list 3 years long. These are the realities. Why would they sit and write, a ton of reports to plug in to have more friction in their system? And so for us, we're really trying to take as much as we can off their plate to make it a no-brainer to be able to plug into support their communities for whatever the needs may be.
You just don't want people disincentivized to do the pieces that matter most, which is the people who need it the most.
Yeah. So if you'll indulge me, I'd love to, so I work in this role, as a professor, working often with entrepreneurs and students with ideas that they're trying to bring to life. I'm just really curious about that. How do you make it happen piece of this? I mean, you've been through it with the solar at a different scale in a different country, but here, what are the steps you went through when you knew, okay, it's time to get this type of funding, and now it's time for venture capital, and this is the right fit, and how do you know you're ready to make your pitch, and all those sort of steps? How do you make it happen?
Tell you what you don't do is you don't make a business plan.
Yeah, exactly.
But
it's a monolithic document that nobody ever reads. Exactly.
Unless you're applying for some angel pitch that sometimes makes you submit one
right.
to get in front. But the first thing that I have always done is find a partner.
Okay.
So for me, a lot of the joy in doing is by doing it with like-minded, not necessarily like-minded, but mission-oriented in that sense, like-minded people, and having a team and that energy is for me an essential element to make sure that you're busting down the doors of every next step. So I went out and found my business partner, who I actually went to business school with.
Okay.
Almost 10 years ago now. And she was a mom in the similar stage in her life.
Facing the same challenges,
had very complementary skills to me, but also big ambitions of wanting to make system level change. And so we then, sat down and started doing market research ourselves. So it started off with, before any of it, started off with hundreds of conversations with parents first like us, and then didn't want to get in the trap of designing something with the blinders of it's just for me. So parents across all different income brackets and backgrounds and states and countries. And then went out and had the same, hundreds of conversations with the other side of the market, the supply side of the market, to understand really, and they were open-ended questions, open-ended, whatever we could get. It wasn't a set structure, but just trying to start to see trends. With the parent side, it was pretty clear right off the bat. The educator side, it was learnings that we sometimes had to extrapolate, like the isolation piece. Nobody ever said, I'm isolated. I feel isolated, but they,
you had to sort of infer that.
Exactly, but they, you could tell that ultimately it wasn't the financial. They would do this for a lot less money,
right?
And it was ultimately burnout that got them. And so once we had all those pieces together, we started brainstorming ideas. It became pretty clear quickly about the family home side, but brainstorming models of how can we consolidate and start to actually get it on paper. So financial modeling, what the unit economics would look like for them, because we knew one of the key pieces would be they had to earn more with us.
Yeah.
So then we could figure out, okay, how much can we actually then earn, making them earn more, to then drive what kind of support we could provide for that amount of money at scale. But we didn't get too hung up on that, because if we're close, we knew that we were probably going to be wrong in about half the assumptions, if not all the assumptions. But
yeah, it would seem like the you got to make these things pencil out at the individual level. The scale piece seems like a slam dunk.
Exactly.
There's no shortage of demand and supply in many ways.
And then we went
you can empower
to see who else is playing in this space and has done pieces about it.
Interesting.
So we went and flew around the U.S. trying to, but at this stage, I was actually 7 months pregnant myself. Yeah. So we got down then. We decided to invest time in building out a deck, was basically. So we knew we needed to raise a little bit in a convertible note, basically, to get started, to take what we have found. We're pretty convinced about there's a solution here to consolidate this market. It's in family home. We know there's parent demand. We pretty sure we can create supply. We need to go and test creating supply.
Yep. Proof of concept.
Yep. And so we put it down in a PowerPoint presentation. I think we were 12 slides or something like that, very clear about this is the problem, this is the solution. And then went out and started talking to people so we came from a fortunate position of, I've had investors in the past, so I at least had conversations to start. But for any budding entrepreneurs out there, we're always open to conversations to help others get started, especially in Montana, where resources around investors are not always as easy to connect with. So we started having those conversations, and we were lucky enough to get a few who believed in us as entrepreneurs and they were convinced about the size of the problem and pretty convicted on our approach will result in something, but definitely convinced on us. So they
believed in you. Yeah.
That's the one thing I would say, is make sure, especially as you're selecting your team, that the cohesive story of your team together is incredibly thoughtful and clear and strategic.
Sure.
Of all of the businesses that I've advised and supported over the years, I would say that's the number one make or break of whether or not you're going to bring in early capital or not. And then make your story really concise. So we ended up closing, it was just over $1 million in a convertible note to get us through that first year of testing out the model and getting our product market fit going. We actually closed that round, and I went into labor the next day.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
A week late. So I think my body was like...
I'm convinced you were actually in labor as you were closing. You just refused to admit it.
Gosh.
I couldn't travel for the end of it. So the other thing is, I would say, you actually control, the more you can control from a fundraising perspective, the process, the better. So you set your process, you set deadlines for people. Obviously, if you're not getting the interest, then I think you probably have to internally examine why that is, and maybe it isn't the right model or the pitch that you're making. But if you can run the process and take control over it, rather than it controlling you, you'll do it a lot more efficiently with better outcomes.
Yeah, and I would think that sends a signal as to the skill and cohesiveness of the team too. Yeah, these people know what they're doing. They're running a tight operation.
Yeah, exactly. And so we didn't actually meet any of our investors in person because I was doing travel, so I'd have to zoom down to show them that I've got a plan for this.
Right, I'm solving my own problem and solving the world's problems at the same time.
Yeah, so I would say don't spend as much time getting the perfect pitch to get started, because you're going to learn as you go what and just constantly iterate. Debrief with your partner, your team, or whoever else is in the room every time, and also ask investors at the end always what do you think my blind spot is. I find that to be a very important question, and you unearth things that you would never have thought.
You should tell them also what's the only response to feedback.
You can imagine, someone gave me the advice once that when you're getting feedback, the only response to feedback is thank you for that feedback.
Oh, really?
So it's just to give yourself a moment to onboard what they're saying rather than
that's sort of like, I get this in the podcast, like, that's a really good question. I think there's a whole radio lab about that, like, turn of phrase. Actually, it's a Freakonomics, When you ask somebody a question and they say, that's a good question, it's less about your question, more about just them buying time to figure out how to answer the question. Whether it's good or not is kind of irrelevant.
That's 90% of raising teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. What do you think about that, honey?
Right. Flip it back. That's a question I had. So what was the hardest question you ever got in a pitch?
The hardest question we ever got in a pitch.
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
I think the hardest questions are, and I'm not sure if it's less about being stumped, but questions where you feel pressure to give an answer rather than saying, we actually don't know that yet.
Right.
And feeling confident enough to be able to say, we have a plan to learning that, but we've deprioritized, or that's later. Or
it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, and you have to
know when the right moment is to say, I don't know.
Exactly.
Right.
And I would say I'm even though I've had a lot of experience, there's always times where I get caught off guard and think I need to answer.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, I'm like, I didn't even give that wasn't true. Or that wasn't even a great answer. I should have just.
Yeah, those situations are traps, I feel.
Yeah.
Gosh. So what's next? I mean, what are you guys working on now? Trying to you've done 27, you said, in the last little over a year. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. How is it? I mean, this rate of growth, like, what's the plan, and what are you thinking about, and what keeps you up at night, and all those things?
So we have incredibly satisfied parents. So we know that the parent side we are delivering on, and we have a huge demand and wait list. So we're less focused on that piece at the moment. We are very focused on our educator businesses and finding great educators, and we're geographically going to stay focused in the 2 states we're in right now, Montana and Colorado. So even with this fundraise, it's not a huge national explosion. We're really trying to figure out, what does it look like to saturate a market need, and what do we gain from becoming a trusted brand in a place like Missoula? And so we are step changing almost from our round close, almost 10x our community size in this fundraise, but it's going to be in the geographies that we're in.
Sure.
And it's about really figuring out how do we recruit and support what's turned out to be almost definitely not exclusively, but predominantly brand new educators. So people who never thought this was possible, but saw something that resonated with them in some reach out that we've done to them. And so trying to figure out exactly how do we find them, and how do we scale our support services to make sure that we're constantly evolving to meet all of the needs to create quality opportunities. We have, in that process, we have started to find out that one of the biggest pain points is less about finding great people and more about, and I don't even know if more is the right word, because it's kind of equal about finding the perfect places.
Yeah, you mentioned that previously. The real estate piece is a challenge.
Yeah, so we have a lot of great educators who just aren't in a licensable space. Mm-hmm. So they don't have an outside space, or it's not big enough, or they maybe share a house, and because this model can generate really great, financial outcomes for them, and it also makes your home a revenue generating asset.
Yep.
So we're hoping the long-term vision is to create as many support systems to plug into a path to home ownership as well over time for educators who are just getting started and never had an opportunity to even put a foot on the rung of that ladder.
Yeah, that seems like it would be a big challenge, whether you're interested in doing this, you're either in the process of buying a home or renting a place that's licensable. Is that a possibility, renting a place that's licensable?
It definitely is, and it actually makes it in many cases, a more viable tenant, because you have predictable income, and to be licensed, it's a pretty regulated space, so everything is really well taken care of, really well and meticulously thought through and organized. So it's actually a great experience for landlords. They just aren't always.
That's what I'm getting at, right? There's a perception, whether it's a landowner or a mortgage lender, or whoever is like, ooh, I don't know, that seems
risky.
A typical renter doesn't come with a a My Village liability policy behind it either.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that I think that as the conversation expands to include property management and realtors, there's a lot of cases to be made for being a part of something larger like a My Village program as opposed to one-offs.
Yeah, and that's another piece of the value of the community, right? You've got this scaled proof of concept where, it's not just one person saying, hey, can I get this lease or can I get this home loan? It's, hey, me and all these other people like me have made this thing pencil and you won't lose your money and all these sorts of things.
Absolutely. So this will be a call out to anybody who is a landlord and has space that has some outside space that either can be fenced or is fenced and is open to joining this movement and supporting your community. Missoula alone, it has 1,500 kids,
Over
I think,
1,500
on wait lists that don't have spots. So this is critical. And in this immediate community, if you've got space and are open to a conversation, we've got phenomenal educators who are ready to get started if we can help them connect with their place.
That seems like a great kind of way to bring the conversation to a close. How do people that maybe are that message resonates with, how do they learn more about My Village and get involved or tell their friends or whatever it may be?
Well, I'm learning that Elke knows everyone, so you can
talk to Elke.
You can either just wave at her in the 5 times a day that you'll run into her in Missoula, or go to our website, myvillage.com, and just there's it'll pop up with a little bot that is a chat bot, and just either pop in there or a lead form, and it'll send straight to us, and we'll get you connected to the right person in the right place.
Awesome.
And it's important, I think, too, that the website is the portal to all of the things. Some of it is facing as if it was reaching out to an educator, but it's also for parents. It's also for business leaders or community members who want to somehow support or be part of it. Filling out those forms will get you to the right person.
Sure.
Yeah, and also, if you are somebody who has always been passionate about young kids, have young kids, and think that this could be a calling for you, you do not need to have the experience to get started with us. We help you from the very beginning of your journey. Or if you do have experience, we have other people who have masters in early childhood that we're able to meet them where they are.
Right.
And so please reach out to us. We are very excited to start a conversation with you and see how we can support.
And you don't have to do it alone. It's your business, but you're not alone. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming by the podcast and sharing this story with us. I love it. Best of luck, and it'd be great to kind of touch base down the road and hear how things are going. But I'm certainly rooting for you, and thanks for telling your story with us.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay, I hope you learned as much in that conversation as I did. Coming up next week, we have founder, owner, and entertainment buyer for Logjam Presents, Nick Chakota. Nick has transformed entertainment in Montana, and I'm excited for you to learn all about his outlook and strategy next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps: executive producer Stefan Borsum and interns Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes. And finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.